Oftentimes, when we think about what class means in the context of our modern societies, we tend to imagine a vague set of social groupings based on the amount of money that a person earns, generally divided into the rich, the poor, and the middle class. But this generalization of such a major aspect of society doesn't really serve to tell us anything substantive about these groups and what interests they may have. A Marxist understanding of class, however, provides a fuller and more accurate picture of the economic forces that drive society. So what is class? Well, every person has certain needs that must be met in order for them to survive. Things like food, water, and shelter. And the way in which a person goes about meeting those needs is called their means of subsistence. Let's take a hypothetical hunter, for instance. Their primary means of subsistence would be hunting. Duh. Another integral part of the class equation are the means of production, or in other words, the things that enable a person to produce something else. For the hunter, again, the means of production would be the rifle, and whatever tools or aids they use in order to hunt. But the determining factor behind one's class is the relationship that they have to the means of production. If the hunter personally owns and operates their own rifle, then they can act self-sufficiently to feed themselves and therefore attain their means of subsistence. Theoretically, the existence of other hunters with the same ownership relation to the means of production would not present any natural opposition to our hunter, because they would all have the same class interests. However, if someone else owned all of the rifles, the only way that the hunters could achieve their means of subsistence would be to sell their labor to the rifle owner. In contrast, the rifle owner's only way to achieve their means of subsistence would be to get the hunters to use their rifles and to take a portion of the hunter's catch for themselves. The rifle owner's relations to the means of production are different than those of the hunters, creating two distinct classes with conflicting material interests, an owning class and a laboring class. These concepts, when applied to our modern capitalist system, allow us to make sense of the class character of the forces that underpin our society, or any other for that matter. The capitalist system is defined by the contradiction that exists between the ruling capitalist class, who privately own the means of production, and the laboring proletariat workers, who must sell their labor. Because of their differing relations to production, both classes have their own distinct interests, necessarily in conflict. The workers alone produce value through their labor, whereas the capitalist takes the majority of that value for themselves on account of owning the tools. The capitalist has an interest in taking as much value from the workers as possible, whereas the workers naturally want to maintain as much of the value that they create as possible. These interests are inherently in opposition to one another, and therefore any action taken that furthers the interests of one class must necessarily hurt the interests of the other. They are irreconcilable. These differences in material interests between the classes creates the condition for a combative relationship between them, and this is the source of class conflict. Class conflict, by its nature, creates instability within society, and so the ruling class must use coercive violence in order to maintain their power within it. This is the role of the state. Many, especially those living in so-called liberal democracies, view the state as a natural arbiter in disputes between the constituent groups of a country, one that exists in order to equitably and fairly manage tensions within society. But this could not be further from the truth. The state is an apparatus of class control, set up by and for the ruling class, and therefore cannot be separated from the ruling class's interests. This is why we cannot simply vote for socialism. The inbuilt mechanisms of the modern capitalist state exist in order to reinforce existing property relations. Through property laws, the courts, the police force, and the military, the capitalists are able to break any resistance against the status quo and impose their own interests. And through the education system and control over the media, the capitalist class is able to create a sense of false consciousness within the working class, getting them to adopt the bourgeois ideology and to support class interests that are anathema to their own. In the absence of this state apparatus, the capitalist system would be unable to sustain itself, and bourgeois society would break down. The only way to resolve the conflicts within a society consisting of two primary opposing classes is for one of them to be broken. The capitalist class requires a subservient working class in order to perpetuate the system, but over time, the contradictions between the two classes intensify as technology progresses, making the system more and more untenable as the workers achieve class consciousness. The workers, on the other hand, do not require the capitalist class to achieve their means of subsistence, and are therefore primed as a revolutionary class. Because of this dynamic, the destruction of the capitalist class would liberate the workers and allow for further societal progress, whereas the destruction of the working class would result in the ruin of the capitalist class as well, and precipitate societal regression. Rosa Luxemburg described it as a scenario with two potential endings: socialism or barbarism. The Marxist Literature Collective is an organization which aims to educate as wide of an audience as possible on socialism, anti-imperialism, and progressive issues, using a Marxist framework. We do this through a combination of online content, the links for which can be found in the description below, and through action in our local communities. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for similar content. You can also find us on Patreon, where we offer exclusive content for patrons who help support the MLC.